Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So 3 years ago at the Peer Review Congress, I talked about the AACR's use of AI to detect duplicated images. And today I'll be talking about our use of AI to detect AI-generated text. And before I start, I just need to apologize in advance to Roy, who just spoke, because if I do my job, I'll convince you that a number of statements he made simply are not true. So, my apologies, Roy. Nothing personal. Generative AI has the capability to substantially improve the efficiency of scientific communication and level the playing field for non native English speakers. However, it may have greater potential to cause harm through its capability to greatly facilitate the irresponsible or unethical actions and undermine the integrity of scientific communication. It's therefore urgent for publishers to be able to reliably monitor. Oh, why did this advance without me touching it? Oh. With high confidence. This means keeping false positive detections as low as possible. In our study, we use the Pangram text classifier, which fine-tunes a language model on the classification task of fully AI generated versus fully human written across many domains and from many different LLMs, and refines the model using synthetic mirrors and low-rank adaptation to achieve a false positive detection rate low enough to inform editorial decisions with high reliability. So we examined 46,500 original research manuscripts and associated reviewer comments submitted to the AACR journals between 2021 and 2024. For each manuscript, we analyzed the abstract and methods text because these were readily available in the submission system as plain text. We hypothesized that authors would be most likely to use GenAI on the abstract and least likely to use it on the methods. We had also observed that the methods text was prone to generating false positives with other GenAI detection methods and wanted to see how this method compared. So, this plot summarizes the total detections in the abstract, methods, and reviewer comments text for each quarter, starting in Q1 2022 and ending in Q4 2024. We used data from 2021 through 2022 to calculate false positive rates for each type of text. For the methods text and reviewer comments, the false positive rate was under 0.1%. For the abstract text, the false positive rate was higher, but was still well under 1%, and therefore acceptable for editorial use. It's important to note that the average AI likelihood score is not the percent chance that the text is AI generated, and also that the score is influenced by the total length of the analyzed text. As you can see, there was a nearly linear increase in detections following the launch of ChatGPT in November 2022, with detections in the abstract much higher than the methods text, as we had hypothesized. Detections in the reviewer comments were virtually identical to the methods text until Q4 2023, when the AACR journals implemented a policy prohibiting the use of GenAI for peer review. And you can see this caused detections to drop by 50%. However, in the following quarter, detections resumed their linear increase. Yep. So now I just want to briefly preview the analyses I'll be presenting. Using our initial 2021 to 2024 submission data, we examined all original research manuscripts submitted in 2024 and looked at 3 manuscript characteristics for their association with the use of GenAI on submitted manuscripts. First, we looked for an association between GenAI usage and English as the native language of the authors. Second, we looked for any differences in GenAI usage that were associated with the identity of the journal being submitted to. Finally, we looked for any association between GenAI usage and the likelihood of the manuscript being sent out for peer review. In the final part of the presentation, we use new 2025 submission data to first compare author disclosures of the use of GenAI to what we detected ourselves. Then I'll present the results of a small case study showing the use of GenAI detection and characterization to identify fraudulent submissions. So, one of the largest potential benefits of GenAI is its ability to aid non-native English speakers in effectively communicating their research. To evaluate how much this might be happening, we assigned each manuscript or reviewer comment author as either native or non-native English speaking based on whether an official language of the corresponding author or reviewer institution's country was English. As expected, authors and reviewers classified as non-native English speaking were generally more than twice as likely to have used GenAI to help write their submitted text. The full difference in GenAI usage between the two groups varied between the abstract, the methods, and the reviewer comments, as would be expected. The greatest difference, threefold, was observed in association with the methods text, and the least difference, 1.9-fold, was associated with the reviewer comments. So next, we wanted to see whether the journal being submitted to had any association with author usage of GenAI. Most of the journals fell in a narrow range, but there were some outliers on the low and high ends that resulted in approximately a two-fold differences in GenAI usage between some journals. These differences persisted to varying degrees when the data was segregated based on the native or non-native English-speaking author classification. There was no single journal characteristic that was associated with these outliers, so the underlying cause of these substantial differences in GenAI usage in submissions at some journals is unknown, but warrants further study. It keeps advancing on its own. Very curious. So we've seen that the use of GenAI by authors was associated with certain characteristics of the authors and the journal being submitted to. We now wanted to answer the question of whether the use of GenAI by authors was associated with specific editorial outcomes. To examine this, we calculated the percentage of manuscripts sent out to review in each quarter of 2024. Results show that AI-generated text in the abstract was associated with a greater than 50% decrease in the likelihood of the manuscript being sent out for peer review. And this difference was even more pronounced for AI-generated text in the methods. It's important to note that the tall box plots are largely due to very low quarterly sample sizes compared to the tight box plots, rather than being reflective of substantially higher variability in the percentage of manuscripts sent out to review. To make sure we weren't just looking at an association with the manuscripts submitted from institutions from non-native English countries, we compared the native and non-native English classifications and confirmed that the out to review association held for both groups of authors. It's important to note that this is not evidence that the use of GenAI decreases the likelihood of a manuscript being sent out for peer review. It is entirely possible instead that the use of GenAI increased the likelihood of peer review, but that it was more likely to be used by authors whose manuscripts were otherwise even less likely to be sent for peer review. In other words, authors who are confident in the quality of their work due to their prior success in getting published may be much less likely to use GenAI than authors who have struggled to be published due to the lower quality of their work. This difference in the underlying quality of the work associated with the use of GenAI, rather than the use of GenAI itself, is likely the cause of the lower chance of being sent out for peer review. It is also possible that GenAI usage is highly associated with manuscripts coming from paper mills, and these have other characteristics that lower the chances of them being sent out for review. So next, we wanted to see how well author disclosures about their use of GenAI matched what we detected. We first examined required author disclosures of AI use for the first half of 2025 and compared this to what we detected. This showed that although we detected the use of GenAI in the abstract text of 36% of all submissions, only 9% of authors disclosed any type of AI usage associated with the submitted work. This means that less than 25% of authors using GenAI to assist with the writing of their original research articles are disclosing this use, and that disclosures on their own have virtually no value without some means of determining their accuracy. Finally, we wanted to see if detection and characterization of AI-generated text in submitted manuscripts could be used to identify fraudulent submissions. So, using an additional GenAI classification capability that seeks to discriminate between GenAI editing and writing, we examined letters to the editor submitted to one AACR journal between January 2024 and July 2025. Each block at the bottom of the figure represents one submitted letter. The colored blocks directly above it identify the characteristics of that letter, specifically whether it was classified as written by a human, AI, or uncertain. If it was classified as written by GenAI, the specific LLM used is indicated. We found that all letters classified as AI written were rejected without consideration until April 22nd, 2025, when the author of that letter was notified that their letter would be considered and sent to the author of the original research article to get their written reply. A second letter, classified as AI written, was submitted only 4 days later, followed by others in rapid succession. Notably, most of these were generated by DeepSeek, and the majority followed a simple, easily human identifiable template as indicated by the purple blocks. This shows that by using multiple pieces of information, it is possible to identify with high confidence that certain submissions are fraudulent. So, just like to thank the following individuals for their invaluable assistance in this project.
So really, really lovely talk. I think it's well worth the effort. People talk about, there's the myth that the Earth is held up by a giant turtle. And the story goes that, someone's asked, okay, but what holds up the turtle? And the response was another turtle. Okay, well, what's that on top? It's another turtle. And of course, the punchline is, well, it's turtles all the way down. So by the same token, I guess my question is, what's your gold standard performance here? So what is the validity of that model in 2025 in identifying AI generated manuscripts? So that's the first question, because I think it's very convincing to me that you're identifying something. There's clearly a signal here, and I think you tell a great story about it, but I'm not convinced that for someone who has to make a decision on the basis of the tool, you've shown me that the positive and negative predictive value are what I want as an editor. That's question number one. Question number two is, I'm curious what you think about the fact that, yes, there are some documents that are purely AI generated and purely not generated, but increasingly authors incorporate AI in their use, and I count myself in that group too. How do we think about that? So question number one is, PPV, NPV, what your data shows there. And question two is, what about this gray area in between? But again, really lovely presentation.
Yeah, I think, in terms of gold standard, these days, you're really, and what we did here is we relied solely on text generated before LLMs existed. And use that. And you're making an assumption in that case that the way people wrote in 2021 and 2022 has not changed substantially in 2025. And I think that's a safe assumption, given the time frame involved and just the way that writing in English has not changed substantially in that period of time. Now, if you talk longer time frames, certainly it's going to be a problem. You go back to 1776 and it's not going to be valid. But I think in the time frame that we're talking about, it's totally valid, and there's no need to use 2025 data as your gold standard. And that the 0.1% false positive rate calculated based on that old data is true. And and I would say it's sort of along those lines. We can see as the LLMs advance and change, that false positive rate will change if you don't do additional training to bring it back down, because the LLMs are improving and their outputs are changing over time. Then in terms of what you're saying, to use, where you use it, this method uses a 400-word sliding window. If you look at a large manuscript, for example, just recently examined a review written, and there you could very clearly see that the signal, it identified the introduction as wholly AI written. It identified the conclusions as wholly AI written. Everything in between was wholly human generated. So as long as you're looking at 400 word windows, it's very good at discriminating what parts of the text were AI generated, which ones were not, or edited, whatever it is.
Really quick follow-up, I'm sorry. Do you have data on false positive rate over time? I would ask about false negative, but I think false positive is rightly the sort of figure of merit here.
Over what time?
If you take your historical data and follow it forward, does your false positive rate change? Do you see drift models?
Well, drift, because you will see drift as usage of the different LLMs changes, as the LLMs drift. So that does change, and they have to be trained to keep up with that drift.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take a question from front mic on this side.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I'm not still convinced by your response. Like, what is the ground truth? I really appreciate the confidence, like in the abstract, and I'm quoting, you say, AI generated text can be detected in manuscripts and reviewer comments with virtually no false positives. Like, had that been the case, developers like OpenAI would have not, taken their classifier out of the market. How can you say with such confidence that your classifier does it with virtually no false positives?
Well, let me just clear, it's not my classifier, it's Pangram's text classifier. And
Any classifier.
yeah, but it's it's sort of, as I say, I don't see that text written a few years ago is any different fundamentally from text written now, and that it is safe as a gold standard. And
Granted, that is but okay, since this is a peer review Congress, I would just react as I had been a peer review. That to me is a flimsy argument, because language evolves all the time. You cannot compare manuscripts that have been published in 2021 with stuff that have been published in 1980, because language evolves and the way we talk about science evolves all the time too. So that is not a good proxy to say, oh, this has all been because of generative AI.
I would argue that language does not evolve the way you're suggesting it evolves.
Okay.
I'm sorry, certain, terms come and go, and but, not to the degree required to change
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Thank you.
John, Mike.
Nice presentation, and I think the numbers sound more reality relevant compared to the other two surveys that we heard, because you had the extra advantage of a more sophisticated approach. But the whole approach is tailored to minimize false positives, which I agree. We don't know whether there's evolution in language, but it seems to be pretty good otherwise. How about false negatives? The entire training seems to take care of the false positives. What does that do to false negatives? And also, given the ability that you have to parse different parts of the manuscript, do you also get some score of this is like a paper that it's machinery and its essence is AI, and it's like fake, versus this is, yes, they have used AI, but just to improve the words.
Yeah, in terms of the false negative rate, yeah, it's like we don't have data on that. Pangram has data on that. They do work on that and can provide numbers about that. And they're very good. So, that I'll leave it at that. And I would suggest contacting Pancro about that. And again, it's like these numbers change over time depending on, the LLMs evolving and the text being analyzed, things, but it's all very high. And honestly, I'd be shocked if usage was higher than what this is detecting it to be, because that would be concerning, honestly, because usage is going up so fast. And then I forget what your second question was.
Whether you can separate a paper that is
Oh,
fake
yeah.
entirely
So
versus
that-
parts of the wording.
Yeah, that is being worked on, now to really improve that and being able to definitively say that this was de novo generated by AI. It was just no human contribution, at least no substantial human
Well,
contribution.
it could be generated by AI, but have an extra layer of a little bit of human touch.
Yeah, and that's where it gets complicated because, yeah, if you generate fully by, and then there's some level of human editing on top of that, which would decrease the score. The more you edit it, the more that's going to go away. So, and discriminating that, and same for translated text, discriminating between something that was translated from a different language to English from being de novo generated by AI is very difficult. May not be.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
We have time for one more question, and I think the rear microphone on this side was the next person up.
Thank you, Chair. So my name is Nabi Dereja. I'm from Africa CDC, Journal of Public Health in Africa. I have two questions. The first one is, what's the acceptable level of AI use in a manuscript that we recommend? And the second question is, what's the level of disclosure that we expect, like to the level of reproducibility, or what's the level of disclosure that we expect in a manuscript? And the third is, how do we ensure, or how do we enhance the transparency in terms of disclosure of the authors that are using AI? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I didn't quite get your first question, but in terms of the second, I think what it looks like what would be necessary is, and what I think we're thinking about is using this, to automatically, detect usage, what we think is usage, and potentially send a notification to the authors just immediately, without human intervention, saying that, we detected such and such usage, and can you please, confirm or adjust your disclosure to account, and get in contact with us about this. I think we don't want to, because actually, contacting them officially saying we know you did this, or is problematic, but some way of getting improved uptake of disclosures. That's the only way I can think of doing it. Otherwise, it's just disclosures just aren't useful. But ultimately, I think really disclosures just are not necessary or applicable if they're using it just for editing, just for these because everybody's going to be doing it. Everybody's going to be disclosing use of the same thing. So there's no point ultimately for that.